If these words found you at this exact moment, take a breath and recognize something important. Not everything enters your life by coincidence. Some messages arrive precisely when your heart has been carrying questions too heavy to say out loud. Somewhere inside you, there has been a search happening quietly, a need for clarity, a need to understand what this silence truly means. And that is why you are here now. The person occupying your thoughts, the one who keeps returning to your mind during quiet hours, the one whose absence somehow feels louder than actual words, is more connected to this moment than you realize. Stay with me for a little longer, because what you are about to understand could completely change the way you see their distance. It may unravel the painful narrative your mind has been replaying over and over during sleepless nights. The story that convinced you that you were not enough. The story that whispered they forgot you without struggle. The story that interpreted silence as proof that nothing meaningful remained. But that may not be the truth at all. Sometimes silence is not empty. Sometimes silence is overflowing with confusion, with fear, with emotion someone does not know how to express, overflowing with thoughts that never become words. When feelings become overwhelming, people often react in unexpected ways. Instead of moving closer, they retreat. Instead of speaking honestly, they disappear into themselves. Outwardly, they become quiet, while inwardly, everything grows louder. And if lately you have felt sudden emotional waves, strange reminders, or moments where your awareness of them seems stronger than usual, that does not mean something mystical is controlling your life. Sometimes it simply means the emotional bond carried real significance. Human beings leave impressions on each other, especially when a connection reaches beyond surface attraction and touches deeper emotional layers. The mind remembers that, the heart remembers that, even silence remembers that. What is important now is not forcing answers or chasing certainty. It is understanding that silence and distance are not always proof of absence. Sometimes they are evidence of emotions still being processed beneath the surface. And the truth is, unresolved feelings rarely stay buried forever. Eventually, people reach a point where avoidance becomes heavier than honesty, where carrying unspoken emotion becomes more exhausting than finally facing it. That moment may still be unfolding inside them now. Because when someone truly feels the absence of a connection that mattered, life begins revealing that absence everywhere. In routines that suddenly feel emptier, in conversations that lack depth, in quiet moments where the mind drifts backward instead of forward. The heart notices what logic tries to ignore, and slowly, very slowly, clarity begins forming. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece. That is why you should not rush to decide what their silence means based only on appearances. Some of the deepest emotional processes happen quietly, beyond what can immediately be seen or explained. People often need time to understand what they truly felt, especially when the connection challenged parts of them they were not prepared to confront. And if this connection stirred something transformative inside them, then distance alone may never fully erase it. Because certain people do not simply enter our lives and disappear without effect. Some become mirrors, some become turning points, some quietly change the emotional direction of another person's life without even realizing it. That may be part of what happened here, which is why the silence has felt so emotionally alive instead of empty. Because underneath it, something unresolved may still be searching for understanding. So if your intuition has been telling you there is more beneath the surface than what has been shown outwardly, trust yourself enough to stay open to that possibility. Not everything meaningful announces itself loudly. Sometimes the deepest truths arrive quietly, hidden inside pauses, distance, and unfinished emotions waiting for the right moment to finally reveal themselves. When something feels unfinished, the mind naturally keeps returning to it. Emotions sharpen our attention around unanswered questions. Memories become louder. Certain moments replay more vividly. The heart keeps reaching toward whatever still feels unresolved, trying to make sense of what was never fully understood. And this next part matters deeply, so stay with me. What you are experiencing is not only connected to them, it is also connected to the human need for closure. When a meaningful connection remains unresolved for long enough, both people often begin changing quietly beneath the surface without realizing it at first. They may be questioning themselves now in ways they never expected, wondering why this connection affected them so deeply, wondering why they struggled to handle it, wondering whether creating distance truly protected them or whether it cost them something important. That kind of self-reflection is rarely clean or simple. It moves in waves. One day they may convince themselves they made the right choice. Another day, they may feel the emotional weight of everything left unsaid. Understanding does not arrive all at once. It builds slowly behind the scenes while everyday life continues moving forward. That is why change can appear sudden from the outside. By the time someone finally reaches out, if they do, the emotional movement has often been happening internally for far longer than anyone realized. But this is where your focus needs to shift. Because while they may be changing internally, you are changing too. Waiting reveals things about your own emotional world. It exposes how much energy became attached to anticipation. It shows how quickly the mind fills silence with stories when there are no clear answers. It reveals the parts of you that fear uncertainty, crave reassurance, or hold tightly to hope. And none of that makes you weak. It makes you human. But if you remain trapped inside that emotional loop for too long, you slowly stop living your own life fully. You begin organizing your world around possibility instead of reality. And this is where the deeper transformation begins. The goal is not to stop caring. The goal is not to force yourself to feel nothing. The real shift happens when unanswered emotions stop becoming the center of your entire existence. As time passes, something subtle starts changing inside you. Your energy slowly begins returning to yourself. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but gradually. You start noticing your own routines again, your own goals, your own body, your own peace, your own direction. You begin remembering that your life has always been larger than one connection, even one that touched you deeply. And reclaiming yourself does not erase what mattered. It does not mean pretending the feelings were not real. It simply means you stop disappearing inside someone else's silence. You stop abandoning yourself in endless analyzing, waiting, hoping, and searching for signs. That shift is powerful. Because when longing no longer controls you completely, clarity begins replacing emotional chaos. The feelings may still exist, but they no longer sweep you away like a current you cannot resist. Instead, you hold those feelings with more awareness, more balance, and more emotional space around them. And that changes everything. Because if contact ever returns, it will meet a different version of you. Not someone emotionally collapsing beneath uncertainty, but someone grounded, someone clearer, someone who understands their own worth, whether answers arrive or not. Do not overlook this part. This is where emotional maturity quietly begins. Not when every question finally gets answered, but when you learn how to continue living fully, even while some answers remain unknown. Not when silence finally ends, but when silence no longer decides how valuable you feel. That kind of inner growth changes everything. It changes the way you see yourself, the way you see them, and the way you would handle whatever comes next. And if one day the silence finally breaks, it probably will not happen in the dramatic, perfect way the imagination creates during lonely nights. It may arrive unexpectedly. An ordinary day, an ordinary moment, and suddenly nothing feels ordinary anymore. A message, a call, an appearance you never planned for. And what gives that moment emotional weight will not only be the words themselves, it will be everything hidden behind them, everything delayed, everything avoided, everything they carried silently for too long until it finally demanded expression. Because emotions held inside for a long time rarely come out perfectly. They emerge in fragments, in pauses, in unfinished sentences. Sometimes a person struggles to speak clearly, not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much all at once. There may be hesitation in their voice, long silences between thoughts, unexpected honesty that even surprises them. And if that moment ever arrives, you may need to listen beyond the surface, beyond awkward wording, beyond imperfect delivery, beyond emotional nervousness, because sincerity is not always graceful. Sometimes the deepest truths stumble when they are spoken. Sometimes honesty shakes. Sometimes people sound uncertain simply because they are trying to translate something enormous into words that suddenly feel too small. And if they finally break through the silence, it would not only represent emotional release, it would mean something inside them changed enough that staying quiet no longer felt possible. But this part is equally important to understand. Even if communication returns, that alone does not magically solve everything. Real emotions do not instantly remove fear. Missing someone deeply does not automatically create emotional readiness. A person can care with their whole heart and still struggle to rebuild what was damaged, delayed, or left unresolved. That is the complicated truth many people avoid talking about. Love and readiness are not always the same thing. Someone may recognize your value completely and still feel uncertain about how to repair the distance that grew between you. They may want closeness while still battling old fears, emotional habits, or uncertainty about themselves. Which means if reconnection ever happens, it will likely require more than emotion alone. It will require honesty, patience, consistency, accountability, and most importantly, emotional courage from both sides. Because deep connections do not survive through feelings alone. They survive when people become willing to face themselves honestly enough to stop repeating the same patterns that created distance in the first place. And that is why your own healing matters so much right now. Not because you need to stop loving them, but because your peace cannot depend entirely on whether someone else figures themselves out. You deserve emotional stability even while life remains uncertain. You deserve to keep growing even while unanswered questions still exist. And strangely enough, the moment you stop chasing clarity desperately is often the moment true clarity begins arriving naturally. Because desperation clouds perception, stillness sharpens it. When you become more centered within yourself, you stop interpreting every silence as rejection and every delay as proof you were unworthy. You begin seeing the situation more truthfully, more calmly, more completely. And from that place, whatever happens next becomes easier to face. If they return sincerely, you will meet that moment with stronger boundaries and deeper awareness. If they do not, you will still have yourself fully. That is the real transformation hidden inside all this waiting. Not simply whether they come back, but whether you return to yourself. Because in the end, unanswered connections often teach people far more than certainty ever could. They reveal emotional patterns, fears, attachments, longings. They expose where people abandon themselves while seeking reassurance from others. And eventually, if the lesson is fully understood, something powerful happens. The waiting stops defining you. The silence stops controlling you. And your life begins moving again with or without the outcome you once thought you needed. That is not giving up. That is emotional freedom. So if these words found you at the exact moment your heart needed them, hold on to this truth carefully. What is real does not always disappear simply because it became quiet. Sometimes emotions continue growing beneath silence long before they ever find the courage to speak. But your life, your peace, and your sense of self must never remain suspended while waiting for another person to understand their own heart. Let them walk their path. Let yourself walk yours too. And trust that whatever is truly meant to unfold will eventually reveal itself without you having to lose yourself in the process. A person can fully recognize your value and still struggle with fear, trust, timing, vulnerability, or the emotional weight of everything they have lived through before you. That is why, if reconnection ever happens, it will not only depend on feelings, it will depend on who both of you have become during the time apart. Because time changes people. Pain changes people. Reflection changes people. Growth changes people. Two people meeting again after distance are never exactly the same as they once were. Something inside both of them has shifted, even if quietly. And because of that, every return carries a deeper question inside it. Not only can this connection come back, but what kind of connection can exist now? Can what once existed return in a healthier, more honest form? Do both people understand themselves more clearly now? Are the emotional needs more aligned than before? Has real growth happened, or is the connection being held together mainly by memory and longing? These questions matter more than fantasy ever will, because emotional intensity can easily make familiarity feel like destiny, even when the deeper reality is more complicated. So if the door between you ever opens again, it cannot be entered through blind hope alone. It has to be approached with honesty, self-respect, emotional awareness, and the willingness to see what is truly there instead of only seeing what you desperately wished for. And there is another truth here, one that may matter even more than whether they return. While your mind naturally focuses on them, the deeper transformation has always been happening within you. This season of uncertainty is shaping you too. Real emotional growth often happens in the waiting, in the quiet moments where no answers arrive and life still expects you to keep moving forward anyway. you still have to wake up each day. You still have to carry yourself through ordinary life while part of your heart remains caught inside unanswered questions. That process can either weaken your center or strengthen it. And slowly, if you allow it, it strengthens it. Little by little, you begin realizing something important. Your emotional stability cannot remain entirely in someone else's hands. Your worth cannot continue rising and falling based on their presence, their silence, or their ability to choose you. Your life cannot stay frozen around an uncertainty you neither created nor control. And this realization does not make you cold. It steadies you. It teaches you how to care deeply without abandoning yourself. It teaches you how to love without making emotional confusion your permanent home. It teaches you that you can hold emotion without letting it consume your entire identity. Once that lesson truly begins settling inside you, something shifts quietly but powerfully. You stop waiting in the same desperate way. You begin living again, not because every question finally received an answer, but because your life is no longer defined by the absence of answers. That is where freedom quietly begins. And from that grounded place, future interactions become much clearer. You start recognizing the difference between sincerity and temporary emotion. You can feel the difference between genuine growth and loneliness disguised as regret. You become more capable of seeing what is real instead of only seeing what you hoped for. That kind of clarity protects your heart without closing it. The emotional intensity may soften over time, not because the connection mattered less, but because you are finally becoming larger than the waiting itself. That is often what healing truly looks like. It does not always erase the feeling. Sometimes it simply changes your relationship with it. Instead of being dragged back and forth between hope and fear every day, you begin standing on steadier ground. You can remember them without falling apart. You can wonder about them without chasing them emotionally. You can acknowledge what mattered without allowing it to become the only thing that matters. And once that happens, even your view of them begins to change. They stop becoming the center of an unfinished story and instead become one meaningful chapter within a life that is still unfolding. This matters deeply because many people confuse emotional intensity with emotional truth. But intensity alone does not always tell you what is right for your future. Sometimes it only reveals where your deepest wounds, fears, and needs were activated. And what you choose to do with that awareness is where the real journey begins. You can use this experience to better understand your attachments, your fear of uncertainty, your longing for reassurance, your tendency to place enormous meaning on unresolved situations. And that understanding does not make the connection less meaningful. It makes you wiser within it. It gives you your power back. It allows you to hold the memory gently instead of clinging to it tightly. Do not overlook this part. The most important answer may never be whether they return. The most important answer may be who you become by the time you no longer need that answer in order to feel whole. And still, life has a strange way of circling back unexpectedly. People do return sometimes. Long silences do eventually break. Feelings hidden for too long often rise when carrying them becomes heavier than expressing them. And if that moment ever happens here, it may not arrive in the polished, perfect form you once imagined. It may come with vulnerability you have never seen from them before. Not surface-level conversation, not shallow explanations, but raw honesty from someone who finally spent enough time alone with themselves to stop running from what they feel. Their words may come out imperfectly. They may struggle to explain themselves clearly. Their voice may carry uncertainty. Their emotions may spill out awkwardly. But the deeper thing to pay attention to would not only be the emotion itself, it would be this. Has the silence changed them, or has it only made them lonely? That question matters, because real growth leaves evidence behind: greater self-awareness, greater accountability, more honesty, more willingness to face what was avoided before. If all they bring back is emotion without clarity, longing without responsibility, then the old cycle may still exist beneath the surface. But if their energy feels steadier, humbler, more grounded, more emotionally honest, you will sense that difference too. And even then, the choice will still belong to you. Not the older version of you who feared losing them, but the newer version of you who learned how to stand firmly without depending on uncertainty to define your worth. That version of you understands something deeply important. A return is not valuable simply because it happens. It is only valuable if it arrives with truth instead of confusion and offers something healthier than the silence that came before it. So let this settle gently into your heart. Their silence may have carried far more emotion than you understood. Their distance may have come from inner conflict rather than indifference. Their quietness may have been filled with memories, thoughts, fear, and emotions they did not know how to carry openly. That possibility is real. But your peace cannot survive by depending entirely on possibility. Your peace must come from something more stable than waiting for another person to explain feelings they themselves struggled to understand. Real peace begins when you stop measuring your value through what remains unsaid. It begins when your energy slowly returns to your own life, your own healing, your own future, your own inner stability. It begins when you trust that whatever is truly meant for you will reach you in its own time, and whatever does not return cannot erase your worth. That is the moment fear starts loosening its grip. That is the moment hope becomes lighter instead of desperate. And that is the moment life slowly begins opening again. New experiences, new strength, new understanding, maybe even new love in forms you cannot yet imagine. Because your story does not end inside another person's silence. Your life keeps moving. It keeps shaping you. It keeps teaching you how to remain emotionally open without losing yourself in the process. And whether they reach out tomorrow, months from now, or never at all, one truth remains unchanged. What you felt was real. What you gave mattered. But what you learned through this experience may matter even more. Because the version of you rising through this uncertainty is already becoming stronger than the pain that first brought you here. And if you still feel the weight of unfinished emotions, that is understandable. The human mind naturally wants certainty. It wants to know whether silence means fear, regret, love, avoidance, loss, or unfinished feeling. But not every chapter reveals itself immediately. Some truths only unfold after both people have lived enough, changed enough, and grown enough to face themselves honestly. That is why forcing clarity too aggressively often pushes peace further away. Real clarity usually arrives when the pressure softens, when the chasing stops, when overthinking loosens its grip, when life is finally allowed to breathe again. Inside that breathing space, truth becomes easier to recognize. If something meaningful is still forming, it will form naturally. If something is ending, that truth will eventually reveal itself too. Either way, your responsibility remains the same. Stay connected to yourself. Keep your heart open, but keep your center strong too. Allow memory to remain memory without turning it into a prison. Allow longing to teach you something without allowing it to control you. Allow silence to reveal whatever it came to reveal. And if one day their words finally do reach you, hear them calmly, not hungrily. Hear them from clarity, not desperation. Hear them as someone who has already returned to their own strength. Because that is the deepest transformation of all. Not whether they finally speak, but whether you have become someone capable of facing any outcome without losing yourself. That is where peace begins. That is where your power returns. And that is where this story becomes larger than waiting. So for now, breathe. Let the silence exist without turning it into proof that you were forgotten. Let the unanswered questions exist without allowing them to consume every part of your life. Allow the connection to mean what it meant, but do not allow it to become the only meaning your life holds. Keep rebuilding yourself. Keep moving forward. Keep giving your energy to the parts of yourself that still need your love, attention, healing, and care. Because the deepest lesson here is not only whether another person eventually realizes your value, it is whether you realize it so fully that no silence can ever take it away from you again. And once that truth settles inside your spirit, everything begins changing. Waiting changes, memory changes, even love changes. It becomes less about needing to be chosen and more about living honestly within yourself. Less about chasing someone's return and more about honoring everything your heart learned through the experience. And if they return, you will meet that moment differently. And if they do not, you will still have become wiser, stronger, and more fully alive than before. That is not a small transformation. That is profound. So do not fear this uncertain season just because it lacks answers. Some of the deepest internal rebuilding happens quietly. Some of the strongest versions of you are formed inside unanswered spaces. And one day you may look back and realize that what once felt like emotional suspension was also a quiet rebirth, not only of the connection, but of yourself.